This episode is brought to you by Absolute Landscapes. Absolute Landscapes is a landscape maintenance company that focuses heavily on commercial property maintenance. Call today for information about the services we provide and how we can best help you. 803-427-5944. So yeah, but I'm excited about this thing, man.
Yeah,
So
me
if you want
too.
to, yeah, so if you want to introduce yourself and just kind of, preface some of the topics or whatever, just whatever, however you want to say, whatever you want to say to introduce yourself is all good.
Yeah, hey, I am the founder of the Relating Academy and a relationship coach. I help all sorts of relationships from with parents, with partners, with business partners. One of my favorite relationship containers that I've had loads of personal experience in as well. I sold my security business with over 1,000 employees about a decade ago. And that's where I started coaching and consulting in many different areas from like business and mindset. And then eventually a couple years ago, after a huge spiritual awakening and spiritual search, it all dawned on me that one of the, if not the most crucial parts of human potential is relationships. And when our relationships improve, personal and business, then all other areas improve. We get healthier, we get wealthier. And that's what inspired me to start the Relating Academy. And now we have a collective of coaches that coach in different modalities in the Relating Academy. And yeah, we're just here helping people relate.
Awesome, man. 1,000 employees. That is crazy. So I'm assuming like some of the stuff that you teach now, you had to use that to make the business operate. That is a lot of people. 1,000 employees.
It is. And I was doing it on the fly. You know, that saying about connecting the dots when you look back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hindsight is 2020. So a lot of the things I was testing out at the beginning. And one example is that in the first 6 months, so it's a security guarding company. So the industry is quite tough itself. In the first 6 months, I was taken to like the labor court like 8 times because I was
Hmm.
doing everything wrong when it came to these relationships with these employees and helping them transition when the time was right. And after I implemented some of the things that I implemented, the 2 years after that I was in the business, I had zero people take me to the labor court because I had learned to relate better in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it, man. That's great. That is insane. So you just so it sounds like you have a lot of experience with leadership too, like leading people, managing the God, I can't imagine. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. We won't get into that right now. That's a lot of people to lead, and manage and have
Yeah.
relationships with.
Well, you're also having like layers, right? You have management, the people that
Right,
you're
right, yeah.
leading directly, and then they get to lead. So also like your leadership style then inspires their leadership style.
Yep.
So you get to do that. And yeah, I was definitely very green as well. I was in my mid-20s when I was doing
Mm,
this. So I read every book I could. I spoke to every entrepreneur I could. Like I was just like, teach me. How do I help people become the best assets? And what was great is that even to this day, some of the sites that I had signed up all those years ago still have the same people. So sometimes I'd go visit friends at these buildings with these security guards, and they're the same people, and they remember me, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Anna!" Like, and that just it warms my heart that you're able to do something like that, and then leave that legacy almost, or that imprint on
right,
people. And yeah, my intention was always like, how do I help? How do I have the best guards ever? So
right.
what is like my screening for the best people to come into our company? And then how do I help bring out the best out of these people? What do they want? What are their personal dreams and goals? How do I help them get there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing, man. Well, congratulations. I feel like I should say congratulations on your evolution, because I can't imagine, going like being in that kind of position of responsibility. If I was in that position in my mid 20s, I don't know if I would have handled it well. you know, because I mean that's a big spot. Um, so okay, so these days, so currently, like, what's your ideal coaching situation? What would be this person? Like, what are they? Are they somebody who's maybe struggling in an intimate relationship, or is it like a business, or is it a mix of things, or? Like what would you be, I guess maybe your ideal client these days?
Most of my clients are entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
They have an intense relationship with their business. So much
Right.
so that sometimes they dread coming home, or they don't come home, for hours on end, or don't spend significant time at home, or they do, but they're distracted on their phone. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that I work with, without them realizing, I help them realize that, your primary relationship is with your business. Is it
Hmm.
working for you? Do you want that? Do you want to shift it? So that's the first type of person. And they have these like desires and dreams of personal relationships being better, but they're not actually taking the time to invest in that. And I remind them that, like, hey, if you treated your client and spent as little time with your client as you do with your primary partner, do you think your client would stick around? Do you think your client would be happy? And that starts to get those wheels turning, them going like, okay, maybe I do need to do something. A lot of the guys and the women are like staying together in this, or staying in this relationship for the kids. I hear
Hmm.
that a lot, like, I want this family unit. And we just review, like, is that good enough? What if this relationship has the potential to be a whole lot better, and you're just like not unlocking the potential? And a lot of the time I also advise people that the relationship that you have had up until this point, in some shape or form, needs to end, and you almost need to start a new relationship with this person. Right, so let's get to that foundational work and build that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's as entrepreneurs, I think it's hard sometimes. We all have this philosophy that we want to have the best, provide the best life we can for our family, but sometimes maybe that we get so hyper fixated on that we, in doing that, we do like what you're talking about. When we're around them, we're not present. We're on our phone,
Mm.
we're thinking about the next email or the next call or whatever. And so I don't know, maybe if we're not careful, it might have the opposite effect. We get so focused on that goal or building that company or whatever it is, that we think we're providing the foundation to have a better life for our family, but the opposite, you know, is maybe true in the moment. And that's a good point, because I think that's something that we don't really, you know, think about as much. Like, I know me, I'm a very focused person, and so now I don't have a family yet, but uh, but still, I'm a very focused person. So I think I would have to be very, very conscious of the time that I was spending, with work on my business. If I did have a family, I had to be very because I mean, it would be so easy. I feel like to if you're, and I mean, I'm speaking as a person who does not have a family, so maybe I'm speaking out of line here, but I'm just saying, if you are focused on a thing for a decade or a decade and a half of your life, and this is how you make this thing happen. This is kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, this is all basically. And then, you get to the point where you spent all these years working to provide this foundation, and now you're starting a family. I think what you're saying is there's a time to make a transition, to make a shift. Like you said, you have to have a different relationship with that person at that point, your spouse or whoever it is. Um, and so I'm assuming you probably help these people make that transition also, once that, whether it's a new situation for them, or if they're just not aware that they're doing that, you kind of help these people, maybe, I don't know how
I
else to
help
say it other than
them
have a
I help them review what's important, because sometimes, I don't know, Cody, if you've noticed, and I've had this, where I'm just like operating because that's what I know, right? Like the next
right.
deal and the next milestone and the next and the next and the next, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I get so lost in that chase, and those dopamine hits and the validation that I get from my business and all of those things, like, that, I forget to review, like, hey, the kids are growing up, and maybe there's other things that I want to prioritize, right? And so it's just about having someone like help you spotlight like what's important. As time goes on, things shift as well as we get older, right? Like our
Mm-hmm.
priorities and what we want out of life. So yeah, definitely help with that. I also love working with business partners. I call it marriage counseling for business partners,
Mm.
because in many ways, business partnerships they sometimes can be more intimate than marriages, even because you spend so much time together. And having tools to like review the vision, having conflict resolution tools, making sure that you're on the same page, making sure that you're able to navigate through challenges and understanding each other's needs and all these things. I feel that a lot of like business partnerships go into, I've had several where I've gone into business partnerships completely ignoring that this is a relationship, like
Right.
this is actually a relationship. So that's also a huge field that I love to help people with.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because just like with intimate relationships, I've known a couple people in business partnerships, and I hate to say it, but it's almost like I'd never see them work out. It's usually that if the business partnerships I've seen, if they start it together, usually one person ends up buying the other person out, and in the end, there's only one, or there's fewer than there were to begin with. Um, and that makes sense that you have to be able to communicate with the partners. And I don't know, I feel like there's so much, as far as like work ethic and drive and determination, there's so much variability. I can imagine it would be problematic if you don't have 100% transparent communication, you know. um and that kind of leads me into another question, which is, with the intimate relationships, because I feel like the biggest problem in whatever relationship we have, intimate, business, family, whatever, is the lack of communication. I feel like I almost say that's the key problem that I would think exists. I don't know. I
Mm.
mean, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but would you
Yeah.
say, in your expertise, would you say that's somewhat accurate? Or at least maybe if it's not the biggest problem, it's got to be in the top three for sure.
Communication comes up all of the time, but it's not necessarily the lack of communication. It can be lots of different things, because you can be communicating about the kids needing to be dropped off here and that errand needs to be run there. And like you could be communicating, but it's ineffective,
Mm,
or it's not addressing the real issues. And saying that a relationship needs communication is like saying a fish needs water.
right.
Obviously, like that is just
Right.
like the obvious thing, right? But then it's like, well, the fish doesn't need sewage water, right?
Mm,
So it's like, what type of water? And then like a fresh water fish needs fresh water, and salt water, So it's about the quality of the communication, not so much the quantity, I'd say. Because you can have a
mm.
ton of communication and say absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So, okay, with that being said, do you see people who who claim to be communicating, but they're communicating in a way that avoids a difficult conversation or a difficult problem? So in other words, I don't want to say that these things are trivial, but they're having like, let's just say there's an obvious problem. There's an elephant in the room between two people, and they know it's going to be a difficult conversation, whatever it is, but they're kind of bypassing that by giving these little, smaller, small talk, basically, conversations. And I mean, technically they are communicating, they are talking, but they're not talking about the problem at
Yeah.
hand. So do you see that often? Because I wonder why it is, and this has kind of set me up for another question. I wonder why it is, other than the obvious reason, that people avoid difficult conversations like that with people that really matter to them. I mean, I know it's a hard conversation and it's difficult, but there's got to be something else other than that there, you know.
Yeah, primarily conversations, and especially difficult conversations, are a skill set that
Hmm.
many people haven't learned. And a lot of the things that we don't know, we don't understand, we fear, right? Like the first thing is just like fear comes up because we just haven't had the exposure to learning. And then what also starts to get triggered is some childhood wounds, maybe like
Hmm.
abandonment, right? Or being afraid of someone else's emotions because something had happened when you were younger, that when you did express yourself, it wasn't received, and there might have been negative consequences to that, right? So there might be a story that someone has about having difficult conversations that they don't know how to get through or to transcend. And the very first step to any difficult conversation is creating a safe space, a safe container, making sure that both people, if we're just talking about two people, understand that there's no consequences, right? Or like we're going to talk about this in a safe way
Mm-hmm.
that where it's you and I against the problem, not you
Right.
against me. That's also a really big thing that I see, is like all of this, like this war inside these partnerships and these marriages. Whereas it's like, well, wait a minute, what is the actual enemy here? Who's the
Right.
problem? What's the problem? And it's not each other, right? So once you start to establish that safety, and then you decide, oh, the problem is that we don't have enough time for each other. It's not, the problem is you don't give me enough time. Can you see the difference? The
Yep.
problem is we don't have enough time. That is a common problem that the two of us can like now fix, versus being accusatory and say like, well, you're the one that doesn't do X, Y, Z.
Hmm. Okay, so when I hear this, a safe space, that means not having this conversation in the middle of an argument. That means letting the argument go, let it settle, and then coming back to the conversation. Is that
Absolutely. One of my
oh man,
favorite
shots
sayings
fired.
is, when emotions are high,
Yep.
intelligence is low.
Hmm.
And you need both that emotional, EQ, emotional quotient, and intelligence to be able to have a safe, difficult conversation.
Yep. Man, I think it's like, since I'm so, I don't, focused and like driven on things as an individual, sometimes it's really tough for me to like set a problem aside and then come back to it later. I don't know. I just feel like sometimes I feel like things have to be handled immediately, or sometimes I feel like things have to be handled right then, because if they don't, they become a bigger problem. But maybe, I don't know. I've learned to kind of just change the way I look at that, because you're right. You're not going to have. It doesn't matter what the problem is. A lack of sleep is only going to make it worse. If
Hmm.
especially if this is an argument that's going on late in the day. I mean, it's the lack of sleep is only going to make everything worse. So, and you're right. You are, because now that I'm saying this out loud, I think like, well, if it's a business conversation or something between me and my friends or whatever, if there's a problem that needs to be addressed, I just take time, think about it, come back, and there's a higher chance you have a solution to the problem. And it only makes sense that would happen in intimate relationships. I don't know. I guess I feel like there's more. I hate to say it this way, with the friendships or the versus intimate relationships. I guess there feels like there's more at stake with the intimate relationships versus the
Mm-hmm.
friendships. Because um, but I don't know. Maybe not. But it feels that way. It feels right to think of it that way. But I could be wrong.
You're right. It does feel like more is on the line, because what if our core essence of what we really want to say gets rejected?
Hmm.
What does that mean? And ultimately, as a human being, we're all meaning making machines, right? And we create this meaning even before we get into these conversations. So like, what if I say this and then that person rejects me, or it is not taken well, and all of these things. And the stakes can be high, like breaking up a family or separating or whatever it is, right? Like, can feel really scary. And um and also we have this like ultimate need to belong. So if this family unit is where our value of belonging is,
Hmm.
right, then it's like, it feels like death almost, that threat of
Hmm.
like, oh, what if all of a sudden I don't belong if I say something, or if I bring something up that has the potential to, hurt this unit or what we've built. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And so I'm not trying to challenge you with this, but like I just want to say that is one of the reasons that I say that if you and I know this is not what you're saying, but if a person puts kind of their purpose, or um if they put all of their purpose, or drive, or motivation into a person, I think that's how that becomes dangerous. Because if that person
Mm.
decides that, for whatever, that you break up for whatever reason, then it's like your sense of purpose has left. That's why I understand what people say. They want to provide the best they can for their family, and when they say that taking care of their family is number one priority to them, I get that. But I just feel like you cannot do that unless you're first, or at least simultaneously, being the best person you can be for yourself. Because
Yeah.
and again, I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm saying that if a person puts their partner as their number one, um I don't know how else to say it other than purpose. It's like, what happens if
Hmm.
that person like decides, I don't know. And I just feel like it would be much more fulfilling if you yourself are content with yourself and happy with yourself, and at least on a path that you want to be on. Because how else can you give a person the best version of you? I mean,
Mm.
I don't. Again, I could be thinking about this. Listen, look. Let me just preface everything I'm saying right now with, I was single for a while. Okay, so it's very likely that the way I'm seeing these things are not right.
I
But
wouldn't say that.
I've also like have with being single for that, I just kind of took a lot of time to myself, and like just tried to put a different light on some of these things and these perspectives, um and just
Mm.
just kind of watching people, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. The thing is that every relationship ends.
Hmm.
Every relationship ends. The last relationship that's ever going to end is the relationship with yourself. That's the first relationship that you have, and that's the one that ends last. That one ends too, by the way, right? They all end. So, with that frame and that perspective, then what is the most important relationship to have? If you know they all end, but the first and the last one that you're ever going to have is the one with yourself. So, a huge component of what we teach in the Relating Academy is being the best version of yourself for you. Lots
Hmm.
of people come to me with problems in their marriages and their business partnerships, sometimes with parents, whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, cool. Before we make any decisions about the relationship, let's make sure that you are showing up in the best way that you can for you, and the relationship with yourself is solid. And then you are in a much better position to make any kind of decisions in your relationships. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say. You cleaned it up. You cleaned it up a lot better than what I was trying to say it. um so yeah, I didn't really expect you to say that, though. When you're talking about the relationships that you work with, the relationship with yourself is also another big. I did not expect to hear that, because I not saying that I didn't expect you to do it. I just didn't think of that, because I don't really think of having a relationship with myself. I don't know if a lot of people feel that way, or what. I just kind of, I feel like I have the thoughts I have, the feelings I have. I feel like I have the goals and ambitions I have. But as far as having a relationship with yourself, that really puts a different perspective on it. Because, I feel like a lot of times we if we treat ourselves like we have a relationship with ourselves, maybe we'll treat ourselves better. Maybe the negative self-talk and all this other kind of thing will not be a thing if we act like we have a relationship with ourselves. So I've never really thought about that until you said it. But a relationship with yourself is a good way to say it, you know, because like I
Yeah.
said, you wouldn't, some of the things I feel like that people say to themselves when it comes to not believing in themselves or negative self-talk or whatever, like we would never say these things to another person. I feel like, if somebody's not happy with where they are in life, they're looking in the mirror, some of the things they might think or believe about themselves, they would never say that to another person.
You
And
should never, ever, ever say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to your best friend. That's how strict you should be with yourself.
yeah, and that's powerful, because but it changes when you say a relationship with yourself versus just saying these things in your head. It makes it, I guess it
Mm.
makes it more real. It makes it like like a real solid thing, you know. Um, okay, so let me kind of backtrack here for a minute. So we were talking about okay, so we're talking about business relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, like all these things. What I think we might have talked about this the first time that we talked. When we talk about did we talk about relationships being a mirror, like a mirror for yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm curious to hear about that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this because I've always heard that intimate relationships were like the biggest mirror for yourself. But did you tell me it was basically any kind of relationship? You know,
All relationships are a mirror. Yep. That's one
okay.
of my core philosophies. And it comes from quantum physics,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how the universe is a hologram. I say this over and over again. There's a CIA document that describes this. Like, it's pretty much well documented by now that it's a it's a hologram, and it's a self-generating one as well. So from the foundations of quantum physics, quantum science, and understanding that that's how our reality is generated, how can we navigate this world where every relationship is a mirror? And some of them, in the spiritual circles, it's easy to look at, oh, these are really nice mirrors. I really like that about that person, so I must be this nice as well. But
Mm-hmm.
then what happens when we have to look at some of the atrocities that happen in the world, and like disturbing things, and then look at that and say, oh, that's a mirror too,
Mm-hmm.
and why are so many people scared of their internet searches being public, for example, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's all of these things that are going on in private lives that we're not like displaying publicly, but it's
Mm-hmm.
actually being shown by the things that happen in the world at large. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yep. So
Yeah.
okay, so this reminds me. It's Carl Jung. Some people say Jung.
Yeah.
He had the shadow self, the philosophy of the shadow self. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I understand it correctly, is that you talk about the good qualities, and it's easy for us to see the good qualities in a person. This person's nice, this person's ambitious, whatever. I must be that way also. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the shadow self, he was basically saying, if you see a person and there's some reason you don't like them, and there's not an obvious reason you don't like them, well, maybe the traits they have, you see those traits in yourself. For example, you don't like this person because they're pretentious or arrogant or whatever it is. Can you ask yourself, do you have those qualities in yourself that you don't like about yourself? Can you answer that truthfully? No. you know and I think that's a pretty big, talk about being a reflection, man. That's like a slap in the face if you see somebody and you're like, there's just something about that guy. I don't know about him. And then if you analyze it and you're like, well, damn, I'm the same way. The reason I don't like that is because I see these traits in myself. um
Mm.
there's another
You
quote.
don't just see the traits in yourself. These are the traits that aren't accepted in society, right?
Hmm.
Like being arrogant or being an asshole, being rude. Everyone wants to be kind and nice and fluffy. Well, that's not how the universe works. The universe is polar. We have both. We have beauty, we have ugliness, we have rudeness, we have kindness, we have the whole spectrum, right? But then we've been programmed to just look and appreciate the good stuff, right? Or
Hmm.
quote unquote, the good things, and shun, deny, and ignore the negative things. But the reality is, like, we all have those. Anyone, if your boundary is crossed enough, you're going to get angry and rude, right? We all have that potential in us. And same for the other side. So it's not even asking yourself. I'm going to challenge you, Cody, here a little bit, because like, it's
Right.
one thing to ask yourself, going like, oh, do I have these traits? The thing that you want to ask is like, I see this in this person, it triggers the F out of me.
Hmm.
How are those traits in me too? Where are those traits? Not do I have the traits, but like owning that, like, oh, if I'm really going to operate in this world as if the universe is a mirror and our relationships are all mirrors, then where is that? So I'll give you a personal example. This year, I've been through a significant amount of rejection in many different areas of life. It's like personal and business and this. And I truly believe that rejection is redirection. And the more we get rejected, like the more we're actually on the right path. So like I'm all good with rejection, but it just
Mm-hmm.
like was a year of like a lot like of it. And at one stage, I found myself feeling quite like in victim mode. Like I'm not better than anyone, that I have these philosophies on relating and I never feel sorry for myself. Like I definitely have those moments where I'm just like, oh
Right.
my gosh, like that hurts. Why am I feeling so rejected? And it took many months for me to wake up to go like, holy shit, Anna. First of all, where are you rejecting yourself? Which areas of life are you rejecting yourself? And where aren't you honoring yourself 100%? And second of all, as much as they are, or what this opportunity or those people, it seems like they're rejecting you, where are you rejecting things too? And rejection is just a natural part of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like good or bad. But I just wanted to share that even though I've had these philosophies for decades and I've been building on them and I teach them and all that, like actually living it is a whole other world. And why I love this concept and also this world of relating is because it never ends. I can't
Mm-hmm.
ever say to you, okay, Cody, I'm done. I'm the master of living as if the universe is a mirror, because the next thing, there's like a bigger, badder mirror that I gotta now look into,
Right.
and really then like own. And so it's like a never ending game, if you want to call it that, in the best sense, where it's like, gives you those tools for self reflection and self improvement if you take them. And these days, we see it in society where everyone is freaking triggered. Like there's this trigger, that
Mm.
trigger, that trigger. And all I invite people to do, if you're listening, is anytime there is a trigger, if you want, get curious about it. It's like, really? Why is that so triggering? Because I could swear at you
Yep.
in French or Japanese or whatever language, right? And if you don't understand that language, it's not gonna impact you at all. But as
Mm-hmm.
soon as I say a word that your brain somehow believes about yourself, even though you're not seeing it, then that's where people get triggered. So I just see that how much work there is to do in this world, in this realm of like relating and understanding triggers, because of how freaking flared up and triggered everyone is, like offline, online, all over.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, because the only way you get triggered is if the thing bothers you. Other than that, it's just words. Like it's just a person saying words, or it's just a person doing things. But I just talked to my last guest about this. Those triggers are your response to that trigger is your responsibility. It's just like this person, whether they're a good person, bad person, a nice person, a mean person, that doesn't matter. The response to that trigger, whatever it is a message to yourself, basically telling you that something about this thing that was said or done is not right and it bothers you, and that might need to be explored on why it bothers you the way it does.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, you brought up the thing about different languages. That's a really good point, because if you don't understand what the language is, it's just a sound. It's just a person speaking sounds. The only reason it triggers you is because there's a meaning associated to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that brings us up to things like childhood traumas and things that come out in relationships, intimate relationships. You mentioned earlier about somebody's needs not being met as a child. Whether they tried to express those things and those things were just basically ignored, or not. The needs weren't fulfilled or whatever. And we take. I think it's safe to say that we take those traumas into our adult life, whether we realize it or not. And so this trigger that you seem to be experiencing could not even be anything about your adult life. It could be something that was repressed that you don't even realize that you experienced from your childhood. It's kind of like resurfacing and saying, hey, we need to address this before we can move on. How do you feel
Mm-hmm.
about this philosophy about the inner child? Do you use this in your coaching or anything? Or I mean, do you, because the reason I'm asking some people have a philosophy of basically, we're kind of getting off into a different area here, but basically meditating with your inner child and basically healing that, giving that child the healing they needed, basically. So in other words, there's a way to do this where people, they will visualize themselves as a child and then themselves now, and basically, have this visualization of these two people meeting, telling that child, everything is going to be okay, whatever it is, XYZ. And that's supposed to be a pretty profound, deep, revelatory, even sometimes, experience. And I don't know if you're familiar with using that, or if you've heard people talk about that coach or anything.
Absolutely. Let me share a personal story and how I use it practically, because it's not like a daily meditation, but I use it when things come up. So with my
Mm,
previous partner, for example, what happened was, at one stage I was like cleaning the kitchen and I asked him nicely, I was like, please leave. He was working on his laptop and he didn't leave. He's like, just clean around me. And I was like, no, dude, like, just leave, please, like, and then he wouldn't leave. And I was like, and then all of a sudden, this involuntary response is just like, get out of the fucking kitchen.
mm,
Like, and it was completely blown out of proportion. And in the moment, I was like, he just didn't want to leave the kitchen. Like, what was that? So after a few minutes of self-regulating and trying to understand what happened, I'd realized that throughout my childhood, my dad is like an entrepreneur. My mom always helped him, but she was also like primarily like with the kids and cleaning in the
mm,
house. And my young brain of when I was 6, 7, 8, 10 years old interpreted it, again, we're meaning making machines. And I didn't have the full picture when I was like 8 years old, right? But it interpreted it that my mom wasn't respected when she was cleaning, right? My dad
mm.
was this like respected entrepreneur, and there was this like disrespect, and I was afraid because my ex partner actually said like, "Are you like embarrassed to be cleaning?" And I'm like, "I love cleaning," but there was something in my brain that went off that I was like, I don't want to be disrespected by my partner because that's the dynamic that I witnessed. Now, I'm not saying there was any disrespect between my parents at all. It was just an 8-year-old child's perspective, right?
Right.
And so in that moment, what I had to do was invite that inner child, like you said, into somewhat of a meditation. I did it in a journaling style where I was
Mm,
like, okay, like, what do you need to hear? You need to hear that your mom and dad love each other. There's nothing disrespectful about cleaning. Like you're safe, you're okay, and reparenting that moment in yourself. And something that I love, the one fact I love about our memories is like at least 50% of our memories aren't real. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't
So
know that.
everything we think that we remember is maybe real, maybe not real, right? But we cling onto these stories so hard, right? Like my dad always did this, and my mom always did this, and my sister and my brother always did this, and I always did this. And this huge chunk of it is just made up, because memory and imagination are so closely intertwined.
Hmm.
And when I realized that, like, my memories aren't even real half the time, why am I living my life as if they are?
Right.
Right. And what if I let that story go? What if, like, I was wrong when I was 8? There was no
Hmm.
disrespect, right? It was just a story that I created. So, how do I give that 8-year-old self of mine that comfort and solace, whatever she needed at the time, to go
Hmm.
like, it's okay. And that's kind of like how you transmute those triggers in the moment. You understand like what's come up, where does
Hmm.
it come from, and then what does that younger version of yourself need. The other way I use the inner child modality, you could say, is whenever I have like a huge like conflict or a fight or something that's like huge tension with somebody, one of
Hmm.
my favorite things to do is meditate for like 5, 10, 15 minutes. It depends how much I need to like calm down. But
Right.
what I do is I invite my inner child into the room, and then I invite the other person's inner child into the room. And it's just me meditating with my imagination with these two children. And most of the time, they don't even say anything, they just hang out. It's just me imagining. envisioning that everything's okay. And these two children, because only hurt people. And
Right.
most of the things, if not all of the things that people do that are hurtful, are from a very basic childlike state, right? They like demand for attention or demand for security or whatever it is that they need comes
Hmm.
from a very deep child state. So when I envision my inner child before she was ever hurt, and their, his or her inner child before they were ever hurt, then it's just like takes all of that tension like way down. And I am mind blown every time because I go back out into the world and then connect with this person again, and it's like a whole new person. And it's just, it's a technique that has worked for me for many years.
Yeah, it sounds very powerful. I was going to ask you if you saw a change, a difference, when doing these things, if you notice a difference before and after, or just throughout the experience or whatever. Um,
Mm.
because
The
I
thing is that, sorry, Cody, to
like
interrupt, but the thing is, like, I don't know, we don't know if these things change because we change, right?
mhm,
Maybe because I'm softer and my energy is more inclusive and not so combative and not so conflicting. Maybe the other person feels safer and they don't want to combat either, so it could be completely like a projection,
yep.
and or it could also be working in a metaphysical field too. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably more of like awareness. Like you're just aware that, whatever reaction you had in the moment is not even who the adult version of you, that's not even what you believe or think is. It's just this child that thought something was the case that wasn't. I think it's just the
Mm.
awareness of it. I think there are very few problems that awareness cannot either fix or significantly change. I mean, just the awareness of knowing that that's not whatever reaction you had is not, like I said, the reaction that you yourself had. Is the reaction of this child. And you brought up a good point too, is like in intimate relationships, it seems like it's just so much. I know it's a different type of relationship versus like a friendship or a family or something, but it's like the ways that we react, I feel like in an intimate relationship are much more like childlike versus a friendship or a family or a business. I mean, and it's just
Mhm.
it's crazy to see that because but 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 the problem comes with this awareness thing, because I think some of us are so like deeply influenced by this inner child that needs whatever it needs, that we don't even see how it correlates with our adult life, and that's where people have these issues like being controlling, or being, avoiding their partners or whatever. We'll get into here in a minute about anxious and avoidant attachment, all that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy how these things just kind of relive themselves, in our adult. And it's not even that the adult us. I mean, it might be a little bit to, I guess, to some people, if in extreme cases, it might be a little bit of the adult version, but it's more than likely probably just that child just didn't get what they needed, and that has not been addressed, basically.
And if you think about it, we even call our intimate partner what? Babe,
Yep.
baby.
Yep.
And if you think that language doesn't have an impact on people,
Hmm.
I'd invite you to think again, because language is coding and it's basically computer programming, and we're the most advanced computers that we are aware of right now.
Hmm.
And so when we are saying babe and baby, and even like, having those like baby voices sometimes with each other or whatever, like you go into that regression, it's like, interesting. What is that? And basically what it is that when you're a young child, you don't have full autonomy, right? Like you have your parents who have things that they control, obviously, and there's a lot of things that you're out of control of, which can cause a lot of hurt and a lot of pain that we store in our bodies and in our psyches. And when we have grown up relationships, we have the opportunity to go back and heal those. right? And this is what like conscious relationships really help people do, is
Hmm.
how do we really like heal those parts of ourselves that were abandoned, or were scared, or whatever had happened in our childhood, and be aware of that, like this is actually a healing container, and that's part of what relationships are there for. Relationships are not there to make us happy. Relationships are there for our evolution and our
Hmm.
healing.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point because it seems like uh, I think that's a byproduct of a healthy relationship, and I use the word healthy carefully because it might not seem like it's healthy, but if you progress through a relationship and you can look back and say, this is where I was wrong, I did this, this, and this, this is how I can improve from that. I think that's a healthy relationship, um,
Mm.
but yeah, that's a good way. That I've never heard of that before. That they're there to make us grow, not to make us happy. But but I mean, I have this philosophy like if happiness is your purpose in life, and I think it can go over to relationships too. If your purpose of being in a relationship is happy, I mean, there's going to be times where that relationship you feel like you're just stressed out and like you're not going to be happy every single moment of the relationship. Like there's effort that has to go into the relationship, and if your purpose of being there is being happy, then what happens the first time you have a problem to solve? I mean,
Mm.
you just exit the relationship and that's it. I mean, I don't know.
The same thing with anything really. The purpose of life is not to be happy. We'll have happiness along the way,
Hmm.
right? But it's being able to hold both sides of the spectrum, the happiness and the grief and the misery and all of these things. And we're wired for happy. There is this book called Soul for Happy. I don't know if you've heard of it, where there's
I
this
haven't.
engineer who wrote it. So it's very practical. And the conclusion of it is that if you look at where we come from as babies, like babies are happy unless a need isn't being met,
Hmm.
right? And then how does that change? That changes because like the world tells us that like you can't be happy all the time. You need to be miserable from time to time as well. Right. And so if we go back to like, oh, actually, if I tap into that essence of mine of how I was when I was a baby, where I was like happy all the time, and then a need wasn't met, and then I was unhappy, and then the need was met, and then I was happy again. If
Hmm.
we could do that and be honest and open about our needs, which is a big thing in like relating and communication and everything, then we'd be a lot more happier because we'd have access to that baseline a lot more, because we wouldn't
Hmm.
be hiding away from all of these unmet needs that people have.
Right. Yeah. Excuse me, Anna. Let's take a break for just a second. Before we do that, I think I want to transition into something. So we talked about the trauma that we experience as children and how that can kind of play into this. I want to talk about after we come back from this. I just want to ask you first, kind of breaking away from these relationships. Is it trauma related or is it something else? And when I say these relationships, it could be like an intimate relationship, or I think we talked about this last time. Some of us have an issue breaking away from, like, I don't know how to say it other than saying breaking away from our parents, like that,
Mm-hmm.
like the influence our parents might have on us. I know a couple people who feel like they can't do things in their life because they need to please their parents or make their parents proud, you know. And I'm sure, I don't know how often you work with like young adults or maybe even people who are older than that. I don't know how often you see that theme come up. Hopefully it's not often, but I know it does happen with people that they feel like, or whether maybe it's not parents, maybe it's a partner, or maybe it's a sibling or a grandparent, whatever it is. Um, I think the key thing is just some people feel like they can't progress their life in whatever direction they think it needs to go because they have to just please their parents, basically. Um,
Mm.
and so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And we'll touch on the anxious and avoid attachment, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that one before we just to kind of make the transition from the childhood trauma. Because the reason I'm asking that now is because I want to know. I'm curious to know if, I mean, that's got to be something from childhood, right? Like I wouldn't go so far as to say trauma, But, you know, if a person feels like they can't live their life to, you know, let's just use a simple example. Their parents want them to have a different career than this person feels like is right for them. I mean, whatever it is, there's got to be
Mm.
something that happened. I don't know. There's got to be something that happened in childhood, I would imagine. And I know you're not like a, you know,
Mm.
childhood
So,
psychologist or anything, but I'm just curious to see like just kind of breaking away from that. You know,
mhm.
I don't know. I think trauma is kind of too far. I wouldn't say these people have trauma as the reason for that, but there's got to be something there, you know?
In 2 words, it's conditional love.
Hmm.
Meaning that once upon a time when we were infants, we could do no wrong and we had this unconditional love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything goes, like you cry, you need food, you need to be cleaned, you need to be held, like whatever your need is was given to you. And there was like love attached to all of these needs being met. And
Mm-hmm.
then at some stage, which is just like the natural evolution of a child growing up, the love stops being unconditional and becomes very, very conditional. If you eat your veggies, you can have your dessert,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you if you do your homework, you can watch TV. And obviously, those like rewards start to be associated with love. And so now all of a sudden it's very confusing because I just went from like infinite unconditional love. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that the baby can do that's going to make it unlovable.
Right.
Right. But now all of a sudden I am unlovable if I don't eat my veggies or if I don't do my homework, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And and depending on how that transition went, in your childhood will depend a lot on how you now perceive whether you're lovable or unlovable in front of your parents or whoever it is that you're trying to please with your own kind of decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense, but I can already kind of see where the problem might be headed with that is when we take that idea or that philosophy into an intimate relationship, because I think that
Mm.
opens the door, you know, for somebody to be used or manipulated or whatever. When somebody gives you their quote unquote love or attention based on how you act, I do not like the way that the path that could set up for somebody. Um, but let me do this. Let me stop really quickly, and then we'll start right back up. Okay, so so we were saying the parents basically this conditional love you think is kind of something that sets the stage for this idea.
For the people
You know,
pleasing, yes.
yeah.
So, whatever you're trying to please anyone on the outside that's not like what's true to you, it comes from perceived conditions of love. And the route back to that self-love and that unconditional love only you can give to yourself. No one
Mm-hmm.
else is going to give you pure unconditional love the way that you crave it, besides you coming back home to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so if you are doing these things, are you giving that love to yourself? You know, so in other words, if you are people pleasing and you are putting something that you really want to do for yourself, a career you want to pursue, whatever that is, are you really giving yourself that love? And I don't know. I'm not the professional, but I would have to answer no.
Mm.
I would have to answer. I would say at some point, man, that kind of it's like the things are going to cave in, and it's just going to hit you all of a sudden. You're like, man, I've been doing this stuff for so long. I've been pleasing these people. I've been kind of living somebody else's life, being authentic, I guess you could say, living an authentic life. And at some point, I mean, that has to kind of just, I would imagine it just hits you, you know, is this not, I don't know. I don't want to say that. Is this not how why some people have like midlife crises? Like, because they just feel like, I mean, I'm being dead serious here because I just feel like there's got to be some what, I mean, you can only take so much of that, you know? Now it's easy
Mm.
for me to say that because I'm a very, like I said, focus driven person, and I think it's easier for me to say that than it is for some people to experience it. But that's the mentality I have about it.
Mhm.
So I guess the question is, how does a person, if they feel like they're in this situation with these overbearing parents or whatever it is, how can a person get out of that situation? Because it's the people that I've talked to, it seems like the way you're saying this makes so much sense, man. Conditional love, because it seems like they don't want to um, they don't want to do anything that's going to make these parents not proud of them, basically.
Mm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And this is where that philosophy of every relationship is a mirror can be very, very helpful.
Hmm.
All right. Because if you're witnessing someone not being proud of you, the best thing to ask yourself is, where are you not proud of you? And where are you also not proud of other people? Right. So if that's being like reflected back to you. And the only way to do that is to do things that are going to make you proud of yourself. Right. To keep your
Mm-hmm.
own promises, to follow the drum of your heart beat, like to do the thing that you want to do. And here's the thing, when you are unapologetically yourself and you do walk that path, you give permission to other people. Those parents who they look like they're not proud of you, or they are unapproving of your choices, what secretly would happen if you did follow your own path is that you would give them permission to follow their own path, because somewhere down the line, decades ago maybe, they made a decision that wasn't truly aligned to themselves. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're building this container where you're reflecting back to them what they had done themselves. Right. Again, all
Mm-hmm.
of these reflections and all of these mirrors that are going on. And the only way to break that is to give yourself permission. And the only way to do that, the best way to do this, actually, Cody, is to surround yourself with people who do give themselves permission and who do, despite disapproval, despite rejection, despite awkward looks and weird dinner conversations, are doing the thing that most lights them up and they most want to do. And when you hang around with enough of those people, you'll see that it's not so scary. You'll see that people will come around. And if they don't come around, it's okay. They were not your people in the first place.
Right. Yes, that beautifully said. I love that. So, what about because we see too, or I see too, like people, you see people in intimate relationships with partners who, like, it's almost like these people uh unfortunately fight for love from these intimate partners. There's just like there's um where one person is clearly trying harder than the other person. Is that kind of the same thing as the parents? Is it the same thing as far as the unconditional or the conditional love is kind of set the foundation for that? I guess maybe the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, just with a different person.
Yep, it's very similar. And a lot of those, again, those patterns come from childhood. Are you referring to the anxious avoidant loop?
Yeah, that's what I was going to lead into. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
didn't mean to cut you off, but I was just going to say there's anxious. I don't know if I have this right or not. There's anxious attachment, avoided attachment, and secure attachment. Is that the only three styles? And so, are all
Yeah.
people in one of those three, or is it just kind of like a mix of those, or like how does that work? Because I've heard of them. I don't really know. Like, I know generally what they kind of mean, but
Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting because they say, I don't have the exact science on this, but they say that
uh,
about 50% of people are securely attached. And then I don't know what percentage of like who's who avoidant and who's anxious. But the problem is that a lot of the people who are securely attached or have the programming and the coding for secure attachment
mhm,
are in long-term partnerships and in marriages. So what ends up happening in the dating pool is that you have 80% of people who are either
right,
avoidant or anxious, and you have 20% who are security attached or have that coding for secure attachment. And so it becomes this like interesting dance. And here's the thing, these anxious avoidant loops happen in friendships as well. I recently had an experience with a friend where I was doing a bid for attention or a bid for connection. I was like, hey, let's connect, let's connect, let's connect. in that moment, she was avoidant. Just in that situation, we don't have this like deep dynamic, but like in that, at this event, she was like busy or like with her own thing. And then again, it goes back to that inner child, the little 12-year-old girl in me that struggled to make any friends all of a sudden showed up, right? And then got butt hurt, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And just from my perception of what was going on. It wasn't that I was actually being rejected or that she was being avoidant, but my perception was that. And then off I went. 5 minutes later, now she comes back to me and she's bidding for attention, but I'm just going like, no. That I'm like rebelling, going like, you don't get my attention now because I got hurt. Well, we'd use language like you hurt me, but in reality, nobody can ever hurt you without your permission. We all
Right.
hurt ourselves. And we also, even just to go on a slight tangent, even that feeling of love when you're like, I'm so in love with you, you're self generating that feeling in love with a perceived catalyst that's another person. What does that mean? That means that you can self generate that feeling of in love with life, with yourself, with another person, whatever it is. But that feeling is self generated. The same happens for hurt. So here I was back in the story where I was now being the anxious person. Again, I did this like bid for connection. She was avoidant. I went and I rebelled. And there was this like moment in our friendship where it's like, oh, what are we going to do now? Right. And then we had to come together and understand what had just happened. So these loops happen in families, right? Like maybe a
Hmm.
brother or a sister wants to connect, and then you're just emotionally unavailable in that moment because you've got something else going on. And then you want to come back to your sister or brother later. Now they're emotionally unavailable, right? So it's more, and here's the thing, it's more of a dance
Hmm.
than the labels, because I find that certain people who are labeled avoidant can be anxious in certain situations, right? But if we just take on this huge label, like I am avoidant and that's who I am,
Hmm.
then that puts you in a very limited box. But if we go back to the philosophy that relationships are a mirror and the universe is a mirror, then I too have anxious tendencies, right? They may not be showing up in the same form as yours, but where are my anxious tendencies coming up? And then the same thing with the anxious person, they too get avoidant. So it's more of a dance
Right.
than like anything fixed or, like I said, labels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that anxious avoidant attachment, is that something that a person just kind of, is that just kind of their style, their personality in a relationship, or is that something that can be improved versus, through whether it's self-awareness or this inner child work, this inner work? I'm assuming that's something that can I don't want to say improve, because that implies that it's not a hell, it's not okay. I mean, I don't, I
Mm.
guess it depends on how you react. It is how what the situation brings out of you. What is it showing you? What kind of trauma needs to be addressed or whatever. But is let's just say, is there a way that can be changed? Because if people are secure attachments, I would imagine that even in situations, they might have situations where they're an anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment. I mean, because everybody, this thing is not static. It's like it things change, and different situations are going to influence you different ways. So I would imagine that even those people who are somehow labeled secure have their moments. Um, so
Quite
yeah, so
possibly.
the basic fundamental question here would be, you know, I guess maybe how do we improve those things? Is it through awareness, through that inner work? That's the only thing
Mm.
I can really think of.
It definitely can change and can shift. One of them is going to be your choice of partner.
Mm,
That's a big one. And, a lot of people who have been through patterns of anxious avoidant loops, there's an excitement to it. There's a story, there's
Mm,
a game, right? And then you'll often hear that these secure attachments feel boring, right?
I
At least
see.
at first, because it's like, oh, where are the fireworks? Where are the
Yeah.
butterflies? You know, like
Right.
what's wrong? Whereas that is your nervous system finally coming to rest and regulating itself, right? And you need that quote unquote boring to come back home to yourself. And that secure attachment is going to come from, for lack of a better word, that secure relationship with yourself. If you know your worth, you know you're good either way, you are you follow through on your promises, you know, you are you do your best, you do like what you can, you don't take things personally. I'm just quoting like the 4 agreements right now from the book, basically.
Right.
But
Right.
if you are so good with yourself, again, I'm going to repeat that all relationships end. It could be decades before it ends, but you know, how are you going to be okay with yourself and so good with yourself in any scenario, whether it ends tomorrow or 5 decades from now?
Hmm.
And so that's that secure relationship is with others. You'll have a secure relationship with others when you have a secure relationship with yourself.
Yeah. I want to ask you about that, the relationship with yourself. But first, do you have any other advice or any sort of guidance for, because we spoke about this before, about how we can be better partners without sacrificing our needs? Because I feel like that's almost like a repeating theme also. You know, we feel like
Mhm.
in order to be a better partner, there are needs that we have to sacrifice from ourselves. Um, and I don't really know why. I don't know why that's the case. You know, I did a couple weeks ago. I did a live on TikTok, and I was asking. We were talking. I was basically what I did was I said, "What are the the biggest traits you look for in a relationship?" And the 4 options were love, respect, communication, and physical intimacy. And by far, respect was actually number one. Believe it or not, I thought love was going to be number one, but it was respect. But communication and love were like tied for second. So the point here is that people value, first of all, they value respect, but then they value communication. But you know, I don't, just to go off on a little tangent here. I think that if you respect the person you're with, like all these other things kind of fall into place. You know, like
Mhm.
I don't think you can have the love there without first respecting them. You can't communicate properly first, you know, without respecting them. I mean, if you just, I feel like I feel like respect is a very big umbrella that has everything, not everything, a lot of things fall up under that. So just back to the question, I guess, and not to answer my own question here, but I guess communication would be a way that we do that, you know, just to kind of
Mhm.
be a better partner without sacrificing our own needs. Because
Mhm.
I don't know, I'm the kind of person, like, I want to know exactly what it is that makes you happy, what makes you, you know, what what do I do or don't do that makes you happy or not happy, basically. So I guess communication, from where I see it, from my very limited perspective here, um, communication seems like it might be the proper way to do that. And I mean, that sounds so obvious. I don't know, man. That sounds like too easy of an answer. That sounds like too easy to say,
Yeah.
oh, just
It
communicate
also
about it.
is
Like, I mean,
very not, it's not very helpful because what does that mean? Right? Just communication. What I want to add is that core needs of feeling secure, feeling
mm,
loved, feeling heard, feeling appreciated, feeling safe. All of these core needs, they are not negotiable. There is no sacrificing of any of those. If one or two of the partners are feeling like these needs aren't being met, there's going to be some problems.
mm,
But the way and the form that we get to those needs can shift. right? So the strategies of getting to those needs can shift.
Right.
So, for example, I worked with a couple where the wife, some of her behavior was being erratic, and she had a core need for attention, but her
Hmm.
strategy sucked, right? And it would like cross boundaries of her partner and just like create all of these problems. So the core need of attention is not negotiable. We need to make sure that her core need of attention is met. But the strategy that she's using, not the right strategy. So how can we implement that core need does get met? The same at a different couple where his core need for security, he's like, I need to keep my family safe and secure. That core need is not negotiable. But the way he was doing it, because he thought that he had to work in the office 16 hours a day to do that,
Mm.
that wasn't an effective strategy either, right? So
Right.
how could we meet that core need with a better strategy?
So it's not that we even have to sacrifice the need itself. It's just how we get there. You know, it's not the
Yes,
destination, it's the vehicle that we have to change. Yeah. That
exactly that.
makes a lot
And
more
then
sense.
just yeah, and just to touch on the respect thing, absolutely, respect is the North Star in every successful relationship. Business
Hmm.
partners, parents and children, parents respecting their children and children respecting their parents,
Hmm.
intimate relationships, and every siblings, every relationship, every successful relationship you can think of, the North Star needs to be respect. Love comes and goes. Like the underlying love is going to be there, but sometimes I like you, sometimes I don't. That's okay.
Hmm.
That's like the natural ebb and flow of things. And that core respect needs to be there. So I often invite people to review their relationships, especially the troubled ones, and go like, is there maybe a lack of respect here
Yep.
in one direction or both directions? And that's often really, really revealing because people don't even
Hmm.
like think about it, you know?
Well, I feel like also too, like once a relationship hits the point of no return, that no amount of therapy can help it, no matter what it is. I feel like that is when the respect is no longer there. I mean, it sounds so obvious, man, but if two partners don't respect each other, it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
Or if it does, it's going to be forced and it's probably going to be a miserable relationship. I can't see how a lack of respect would be conducive to a happy, fulfilling relationship. I can't see that
Mm-hmm.
because I think you're right. I think the North Star is respect. I think a lot of people, I don't. It was surprising to me though because I really expected love to be like the number one. I was like, oh man, we're gonna do this thing. Love's gonna be number one, but it wasn't. I mean, most people look for
Mm-hmm.
respect or they value respect more. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like I said. I don't think you can fully love a person unless you respect them. You
Mm-hmm.
might like them, you might like them a lot, but you're not gonna love them if you don't respect them.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
if
know.
I
Maybe.
may challenge you on
Yeah.
that, and anyone that's listening to this, like, can you respect someone who has a polar opposite perspective of like from you?
Hmm.
And that's like a
There's.
huge narrative that we have going on in the world where we have all of
Yep.
these perspectives, and we're like, well, I can still respect you even if you think and believe and feel differently from me. And
Yeah.
how do we do that on a very like deep and real and authentic level?
The way I would do that, I don't know if I don't know if you're just being saying a hypothetical question, but the way I would do that, I mean, you have to understand, man, that the reason people have one of the reasons people have the beliefs and the views and the values they do is because they were born. It could be something as simple as they were born in a different area to different people at a different time than you. One thing that really helps me out with that is like if I see somebody that's just like the polar opposite of me as far as beliefs and values and things like that, I'm like, okay, well, if I were them, if I grew up in their environment, their part of the world, whatever it is, I would have the same beliefs. I would have if I had the same family structure, the same values, the same childhood experience, whatever. I would have those beliefs that they have. Like I would be that person. And the reason I
Mm,
don't is because I'm in a different spot. I grew up, I had different parents, I had different, different environment, different part of the world, whatever it was, different culture, and different experiences that made me or gave me the values and the beliefs that I have. And so I don't know, I don't think that would be, I don't think that's considered empathy. I would consider that, maybe just awareness. Like I was talking about
Mhm.
earlier, I think awareness can solve a lot of problems we have, especially with this whole idea now that what's going on these days, man. There's so many people arguing about so many different things, and I just think it's yeah, I just think if we realized that if we were those people, if we were in their spot, we would have the same thoughts and beliefs they have.
Mm.
Uh,
One thing I try to help people encourage, because it's so easy to find what we differ on, right?
mhm.
Like we're so different, and that's a bad thing. But, if you ask deep enough questions, you'll find that most people actually want very similar things. Most people
Yep.
want to belong. Most people want to be loved. Most people want to be appreciated. We, at like a very deep core human species level, we want very similar things. And again, anything you're like trying to debate, it's like, how can it be you and this person against the problem, not you
Right.
against the person?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Let me do this. Uh, okay. Let me make a transition real quick because I want to talk to you about relationships with like employees and business relationships and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
I think we covered. Is there anything else you want to cover as far as intimate relationships go? Because I want to ask you about business relationships and professional, and then before we end, I want to ask you about the relationship with yourself because that's a big one. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot on the intimate side. And the other thing I remember you mentioning last time when we spoke is just also covering more on um, parents. I don't know if they have like religious things going on, but we can see if that
Yeah, so I think that
comes
was
up.
kind of I think we touched on that a little bit with like as far as breaking away. I
Mm-hmm.
think what that was I took some notes on this before we talked, and I can't remember exactly what it was I was leading up to with that, but
But I do think we did touch on it. So if we do business and employee and leadership relationships, and then
mhm.
relationship with self, I think that would be perfect.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, that we can do that. The parent thing was just I think what I was probably getting to with that was um the parents kind of forcefully I don't want to say forcefully because I'm stepping into a risky territory here. That is bound to piss somebody off,
Imposing.
but that's just yeah. I mean, it's just what it is. But
Imposing.
like these parents are like I guess overly forceful on influence. I'm not talking about children. I'm talking about young adults and people who are late teenager, early adults. It's just like that overbearing like uh mindset. I feel like from what I've seen, so basically here's what it comes down to: people who have really strict parents seem to be the ones who want to get away from that the most at the first moment they get a chance. Now I'm not
Yeah.
I don't work with children or teenagers or whatever. I'm just saying adults that I've seen that have really strict parents, they seem to just want to break free from that, you know
Hmm.
and that had to be what I was alluding to because we touched on the other stuff, but
Yeah.
if we have time, we'll come back to that. But I do want to ask you about the leadership,
Yeah.
the leadership. Okay, so you said you had 1,000 employees, and I know there were managers and things like that. But what would you say is like the biggest lesson from leadership? Like what is the because I've talked to a guy on here about leadership before, and we were talking about I can kind of see where this answer is going to go, or at least where his answer was. But it was like being the best leader is like being the best version of yourself. Like being authentic, being aware, being open with your employees. These are just kind of some general things, but I'm just curious, like, because you said that you went from having all these different complaints to having no complaints, and I mean, I'm just curious, like, what was a vital lesson there? I mean, was it just I don't want to insinuate the answer, but like what was it there?
A few things. So I have to be honest that I used to make some of my employees cry.
Hmm.
I was not the better than everyone, like highest self version of myself. Like I would have these I'd have these meetings with my managers and invite people to share like one thing that you really appreciate about them and one thing they can improve on, right? And then we're like, okay, now tell me. And it's really hard for an employee to tell their boss what they could improve on because, like,
Yep.
you know, that container needs to be really safe. And I'd often get the feedback, well, Anna, you could be a little bit more patient, because I'd lose my cool a lot. And
Hmm.
so the reason why I, despite not being maybe like the best or nicest human in certain situations, right? The reason why I had such loyalty and such great people work for me is because my intentions were always like solid, and we
Hmm.
knew what we were trying to create. We were trying to create the highest quality of service, right?
Right.
And I was like, if you want to be the best, then then it's going to require certain elements of you. And it's not
Hmm.
always going to look nice, and it's not always going to look pretty, and it's not always going to be nice, right?
Right.
And I actually had an assistant years later, like 5 years after I'd like exited that business, and she stayed there, and then she wanted to move, and she comes over and she works for me in a second business. And I say like, hey, I used to make you cry all the time. Like, why do you want to continue to work for me like 5 years later? And she goes like, no, but Anna, you made me the best. Like, you really improved, like helped me improve. And that just goes to show that if you have that vision and people who want to put their best foot forward and want to show up and shine and create something great together, then the semantics and the things that go in day to day don't have to be perfect, right? And they won't be
Hmm.
perfect. And there will be emotions. And, being a regulated leader doesn't mean like you're not showing any emotion. It just also means you're learning. So I would learn every time I would upset someone to apologize, like quickly apologize. That was one of our tenants in our business, is like, if you
Hmm.
do notice that you've done something wrong, then apologize, right? Make it right, whatever it was, because we all have these opportunities to have emotions and explode, but what do you do it afterwards with that? So that was one of the one of the lessons. And then the biggest thing that shifted from having all of these labor law complaints to zero was really getting clear on the container that I was building. And anyone who came in, I was like, right, these are the rules. We're respectful, we're punctual, we're da 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 da, right? And this is it. And I had to uphold it as the leader. And then I had to help my leadership team really uphold it and be quite
Hmm.
strict on it. Because then if they would falter, then the next level would pick up on that, and then they would slack as well. So I would have to create this container and also enforce it. And the wrong people are all around. They're always going to come in, but they're quickly going to exit because they don't feel comfortable. When
Right.
you have an impeccable container, the wrong people who may not have the best intentions, or they're maybe lazy or whatever, want a free ride, they're going to come in, go like, I hate this container. It's too, like, we want performance and we want to do great things. Like, I don't want to do great things. And then they leave, they disappear. So what this helped me do is create an environment where the wrong people selected themselves out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating because what I'm hearing you say is something that's kind of also a repeated theme that I hear, which is a vision. Building a vision for the company or for the business. You know, a typical example is somebody like Elon Musk, who's a visionary, and he's built this vision. His company is based on this vision. So if your employees believe in this vision, that has to make a difference. I mean, it has to make a difference with the people that you have. But so what I'm hearing you say is that you basically built this self reinforcing environment that if the wrong person was there, maybe they weren't there long. Um,
Exactly.
and so, but I would imagine the way that a person does that is you have to as you're putting this thing together and as you're building this thing, you have to create that as you're going, because if like, let's just say if you start with 5 people, and one of the 5 is not necessarily the best person, maybe 2 of the 5 are just average, and then the remaining 2 are like very extraordinary employees or whatever. You have to kind of build that as you go. So I guess the more and more you piece this thing together, the more pieces that are added to this thing. um it's about who you add in as you're going, I guess, is the way the only way I can think about it, because because I see what you're saying. There's a I don't know if you've heard of this. There's something called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule.
Yep.
People think about that a lot with like productivity. 20% of what you do gives you 80% of the results. But there's also a different one called Price's law. I don't know if you've heard of that one or not. It's basically the square root of anybody involved produce half the output. So if you have
Mm.
25 people in a company, based on this model, 5% do 50% of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a lot of jobs, man, before I started my company or whatever. And as I was kind of in the early stages of it, I had a lot of jobs, and it's like in these huge companies, there are a lot of people who like just do just enough to not get fired, just enough, like I mean, they're just barely making it. So, anyways, back to the point. You did this through a vision and through a philosophy and a value system. It sounds like, because
Yeah.
the people that are around you that you're working with, I mean, how many people do you know that complain about their employees not doing shit, or just like not employees, their coworkers not doing anything? Just how many people do you know that have like jobs that are talking about? There's always that one employee that just seems to be or coworker that seems to be a headache for everybody. You know, and I just imagine that these places had that vision, or a philosophy or a value system or something where everybody was contributing to the same vision. I can only imagine that the benefit that would have.
Mm. The only reason why someone like that would trigger you is because, again, going back to that core philosophy, is
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's in you, right? But at the end of the day, like, what do you want? Do you want to be your best self? Yes. Okay, then just be your best self. Like, nobody else matters in this equation besides you being your best self. And then you hang around with more and more people who are being their best selves. And whoever is doing whatever, that's first of all your judgment. Maybe that is their best self. You never know. People might be going through health things or personal things, or all sorts of things, right? And stay out of the gossip, do the best that you can do, and focus on the next thing that you want to achieve.
Yep. So this might be a good time to bring in that best self, that relationship with yourself. How
Mm-hmm.
do we nurture that and grow that? Because since you said this when we started this thing, man, it has been on my mind that this is the most. What did you say? The most important relationship we have.
It's the first one and the last one that you'll ever have.
Hmm. That makes sense, though. That makes sense, because whatever you're going through on those if you go through a breakup, if you go through a death of a loved one, whatever, yes, you might have family and friends, but you're with your own self 24 hours a day. you know
Mm-hmm.
and so if that relationship is not healthy, if it's not something that you value, um I am certain that influences your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I wish I would have known about. I wish I would have thought about this before this conversation, because this is the first time I'm thinking about a relationship with yourself, and not just your thoughts and your beliefs. Because it's easy to say, oh well, I think this, or I believe this. These are my thoughts. These are my beliefs. But when you say a relationship with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that changes everything, man. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you go to like taking care of your body, going to a gym, like taking care of your health, all these things, it puts a different spin on everything when you say this is the relationship with myself. I respect myself. I value myself. Whatever.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further, just to challenge you a little bit more, is that
I'm ready.
you'll have you have many selves. So you have a self in you who is super ambitious, has
Mm-hmm.
goals, has a drive, has a vision, has like wants to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
You also, and I'm making an assumption, but a lot of people here will resonate with the whole, like, everyone procrastinates and self-sabotages and all of these things, but like, I'd guard a guess that you probably have a self in you who's a lazy piece of shit.
Mhm.
So how do you build a relationship with the ambitious you and the lazy you, right? And then also help them understand each other. So for example, for a lot of people, that self-sabotaging part of themselves, they have quite a negative relationship with that part of themselves, and they beat on them. They go like, you shouldn't do this, you should be better, like tomorrow you will be better. But they don't understand that that part of themselves that is self-sabotaging is actually just trying to protect them, because there's a part of them that believes that they're safer in their comfort zone. There's a part of them that doesn't want to go out there and get rejected and get criticized, because anything great that you're going to do, you're going to get rejected and criticized. And there's a part of you that's scared of that and really doesn't want that. So this self-sabotaging part is actually a protector that goes like, well, it's safer here. It's one of my favorite quotes is that the ships are safe in the harbor, but ships aren't meant to be in the harbor. They're meant to be out
Exactly.
sailing, right?
Yep.
So this relationship with self starts to become nuanced, right? Because then it's like, okay, how can I have compassion for the self-sabotaging part of me, going like, I see you, buddy. Thank you for trying to protect me. But what's more important is that we do cool things and we go out there and we provide a great service to people, and we reach out to people, and they may say yes and they may say no, and that's all fine. And then build that relationship with that ambitious part of you, going like, okay, we can do this, and this is what we're doing, this is what we're going for. So that is like more specific of how to start to build that relationship with yourself. And two more elements that are super powerful when you're starting to think of this relationship with self is, one, your thoughts. Because
Mhm.
in Buddhism, there's a saying that says that thoughts think themselves.
Hmm.
Everyone has thoughts that are like, where in the F did that come from? Like,
Mhm.
that is a bizarre thought. But we don't get taught that we don't have to take it on as our own. We can actually be warrior gatekeepers of our mind, go like, I choose. Some of these thoughts are going to be mine and healthy, and I choose them. And some of them I'm going to bounce, like, out of here. Like, that's the voice that tells you you're whatever, like negative, or wants to criticize you. You can say, like, not today. Thank you. You like a
Right.
bouncer at a club almost.
Yep.
So, like, really getting crystal clear on that relationship with your thoughts, and that's how you start to become your best friend and your own best friend, and only tell things to yourself that your best friend would say to you. And then the second big relationship when it comes to self is our relationship with our emotions. I feel a lot of people are scared of big emotions because, like, what the consequences are potentially, what they meant in the past. And for us to feel better, we need to learn to feel better. So we actually need to have the skill set of feeling feelings.
Mhm.
And that's really important. Knowing that, understanding that, for example, every emotion, if processed correctly, lasts no longer than 90 seconds. The only reason why an emotion looks like it lasts longer is because we attach a story to it and we start to loop it. Right. So it's like, they did this to me, or I did this and I'm feeling embarrassed, guilt, or shame, or they did this, so I'm feeling angry or sad, or whatever it is. So that story starts to perpetuate this 90 seconds that keeps repeating over and over again. But if you really
Mhm.
stop and you separate the story and the emotion, you're like, let me just feel the emotion through my body. Let me process it. And then I can process the story separately. I can have a much healthier relationship with my emotions because I'm not scared of them hijacking my day and hijacking my entire life. So those are some elements that I would start with when building a relationship with yourself.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I love the way you said that. I think I kind of see that the same way about building this relationship with yourself, but I see it. I see it as more like building trust with yourself, because again, this is the first time I'm hearing this about, with yourself. I've always just seen this as thoughts. Like, I have thoughts that say, I want to do this thing, I want to go to the gym, and I have thoughts that say, oh well, take it easy today, whatever, XYZ. But
Mm-hmm.
my thing is like, is I think we're kind of on the same wavelength here when I say this, but the way that you uh, learn to trust yourself is like build confidence with yourself is the same thing. So, for example, I wouldn't refer to it as having a self that I'm competing with. I would refer to it as having a thought that I'm competing with. Although when you say self, it makes it like more real. But for example,
Yeah.
like let's say that I tell myself that I'm going to the gym, like, on this day for this thing, whatever. There might be a voice in my head that says, no, you shouldn't go today, take it easy today, whatever. Well, the problem is, if you listen to that voice long enough and often enough, you will learn to not trust yourself, and you'll learn that, like, I mean, it's one thing to tell somebody, hey, meet me at this time, this day, we'll do this thing, and then you don't show up. That's one thing. But when you do that for yourself, when you don't show up for yourself, it's like the same, if not a worse effect.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you show up, if you tell yourself, "Hey, I'm going to do this," I'm telling myself I'm going to do this. I am going to do this. You show up. That builds confidence, because you can trust yourself. You can show yourself that you can trust yourself, and you can still take that time off. You can still take the day off whenever it is, but as long as you are the one who is in charge of scheduling that. Don't let that thought come up and say, hey, I don't want to do this today. And it doesn't have to be the gym. It can be, the gym, a course you need to take for your education, whatever. But you can take the day off as long as you are the one that is saying, okay, I'll work out Monday through Friday. I'll take Saturday and Sunday off. As long as you are the
Mm-hmm.
one who is in charge of that, and not the other way around.
Yep.
Because I think when it's the other way around, when that thought comes up and it says, basically, that the voice of comfort is the way I like to refer to it, that wants us to stay comfortable, wants us to stay in a certain spot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you let that voice guide you and make the decisions, you won't. The relationship with yourself, as you would refer to it, I think would be fractured, because you can't trust yourself, and there would be no confidence there. But when it's the other way
Mm-hmm.
around, you say, hey, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna do this, this is what I'm doing. If you tell yourself you're doing it and you stick to it, then I can't explain the mental resilience that builds. It's like, I don't know if you know anything about cold water therapy, ice
Mm-hmm.
baths.
Yeah.
You know how hard it is to tell yourself that you're going to get up in the morning and do a
Yep.
43-degree Fahrenheit cold
Mm-hmm.
plunge, like.
Yep.
But if you tell yourself you're going to do it and you do it, and it's just like anything, if you do it and you feel better afterwards, each time you do that, you're proving yourself to yourself. And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this to come across as like being a tyrant to yourself, and being a dictator, as far as like, you have to do this and this, but as long as you are in charge of basically the easy days, don't let it be the reverse. Don't let that voice in your head dictate when you take a
Mm-hmm.
break, as long as you can build that trust with yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I understand that might come across as intense, but I think the more you do that and the more you learn to trust yourself, I think that's, to me, now that we're talking about a relationship with yourself, I mean, all that makes sense, man. It only makes so much more sense, because you are learning to have that relationship with yourself. Because a lot of us wouldn't tell somebody, like I wouldn't tell you, hey, let's meet this day for whatever reason, XYZ. And then if I just didn't show up, didn't call, didn't text you or whatever, I would feel bad about that. But I mean, it's like when we do that to ourselves, we don't think it's the same. We don't think it's the same thing, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love how this ties into what we were talking about, respect, and how we were
Hmm.
saying that every successful, healthy relationship has respect. And that includes the relationship with yourself. And every time you keep your promises to yourself, that respect builds. You put it into the bank of respect. Respect, you
Yep.
can look at it like this bank, right? You either
Mm-hmm.
add to it or you withdraw from it. And we're all human. We've all done shit where we've withdrawn from the bank of respect,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I'm like, don't leave me hanging. I'm not alone here.
Yeah.
And
No, I
um
got you 100%.
Yeah. And but the more we start to like, add deposits into this bank of respect and keep these promises out to ourselves, especially the ones that people don't see. Those are
Mm,
really, really big. And those are the easiest to break. Sometimes they're easy to keep, but we don't, right? And then all of a sudden, we find ourselves not so confident and not so whatever is going on in life or in business. And then it goes back to like, oh, yeah, remember all those promises I broke to myself when nobody was looking. Let me go back and figure that part out.
yeah, exactly. But it translates too, though. It translates to other things because if you can't keep the promises that you have, that you tell yourself, what happens if you have intuition, if you have a feeling about something, if you just have a gut feeling that, oh man, maybe
Mm,
I just shouldn't go to, I just don't feel right about this person, or I shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. What happens then? Because if you can't even trust yourself to keep your own agenda with yourself, what happens when it comes to the point where you have to really ask yourself a question? Like, should I pursue this? Should I do this? I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's like a snowball effect, and it can
mhm.
be a positive or a negative snowball. It just depends on. I love this quote. I don't know who said it. There's a wolf inside of all of us. One is bad, one is good. Basically, which one
Yeah.
survives is the one you feed the most. Something
Mhm.
along those lines. And so, but I love that though, because like it's like when you have this intuitive intuition, this question. I mean, it's like we talked about earlier. You are with yourself 24 hours a day. And sometimes you can have the best partner, the best friends, the best, spouse, parents, whatever. But sometimes, man, there's just those things where people just do not know what's right for you the way you do. I mean, there's just some things. There's just things that only you can answer. Like only you have the answer for yourself.
Mm.
Um,
If I may add
eh,
to that with intuition, and you brought up such a great point there, Cody. I'm so glad you linked those two
mhm,
because there are a lot of people running around in the world not trusting their intuition. And also, that's why, then they look to other people for validation, and that people
yep,
pleasing starts to come in, and they
yep,
don't follow the drum of their own heartbeat, and they don't follow their own path because, it's all kind of like coming full circle. And
hmm,
here's the thing with intuition, the advice, follow your gut, follow your intuition, is not the best advice. And it can be downright dangerous sometimes.
yep,
But I look at it as if I told you, hey, Cody, it's really healthy to drink water. You're like, okay, great. Same, like blanket advice. Like, it's good to follow your gut and your intuition. And
hmm,
then, but like, well, if the water's dirty, it's not so good to drink it, right? So if you don't have that relationship with your intuition where it actually you listened to it and it guided you and it's guided you correctly, and then that the relationship got reinforced where
yep,
it's like that clean stream of consciousness, that clean stream of water that you would be drinking, it could also have gotten you into trouble before, right?
hmm,
And so having an understanding of the source of your intuition and how connected you are to it and that relationship that you have with it, and do you trust it, has it led you into the right places before, that is super, super powerful. For many years, for about 13, 14 years of my life, I actually actively practiced throwing myself into unknowns. Like, do shit that was unknown, new
yeah,
experiences all of the time, just so that I could train myself to trust my intuition and to not only survive in the unknown, but thrive in the unknown and have that relationship with the unknown where the unknown's got my back. Like, I'm not scared of the unknown. The unknown is fun. Like, there's so many cool things that can happen out of it. But that was that like training ground that I had for myself where it was like, okay, how do I train myself with this intuition and then trusting myself and then et cetera, et cetera.
I love that, man, because you talked earlier about over the past year, maybe 2 years, you faced a lot of rejections and this kind of thing, and putting yourself into those situations of unknown. I mean, it had to help you with those rejections because you had been there before. You know, you had been to the place of where there were unknowns, and you basically proved to yourself that you can handle whatever that was. You know, when the situation of the unknown, when these rejections came up, uh, especially if it's a business rejection, man, you like that's an unknown situation. You don't know what's going to happen from there.
Mm.
But I would also imagine too, and I'm not asking, you know, for your personal information, but I would imagine that there were also cases where you were not rejected and you had business opportunities that ended up, you know, succeeding. And but you couldn't have put yourself in those situations had you not been familiar with the feeling of the unknown to begin with. You know, because I mean that's where it all started. Like when these business, whether it's a rejection or a success, at the beginning of it, it's unknown. You know, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going in there, you're trying to make a sale or whatever it is, and had you not been comfortable with that, I'm not saying you couldn't have done it, but you were familiar with it, is what I'm trying to say, and that puts us in, you know, that environment. It's like I can't tell you, like over the past decade of doing business, that is one of the things that I value the most is putting myself in those rooms, you know, putting myself in those uncomfortable situations because yes, the purpose is to make the sale and get the business and that kind of thing. But even if you don't, man, you come out a better person because you've had that experience, you've learned and you've grown from that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, we hear what's the saying that when you know, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I mean, it's yes, it sounds simple, but it's true. It's so true that if you are in that spot and if you're there and you're comfortable, if you are the smartest person in that room, that's the limit. That's the ceiling. You're not going to get any smarter than that. If there are not people around you that are contributing to your growth and your development. And so yeah, I love that. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's where that whole thing started. You know, was being in that unknown, and to make sure I understand it correctly, you voluntarily put yourself in this, right? Like you put yourself in those positions of unknown. See, that's incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
so I'm sorry
I've
not to get
started.
hyped up. I just, I just
Thank you.
this is I like this. Yeah.
Yeah, there were just so many different industries and businesses that started and just adventures and travels. And whenever I get the opportunity and it was new, I just say yes. And luckily, I had the opportunity to do that because I didn't have a young family that was relying on me. Like I just had me, right? So I had
Hmm.
I got an opportunity to build that muscle with myself, which I'm very privileged that I got to do that. And yeah, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But like they say these days, like do it for the plot, right? Like what if? You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something too I've always said, man. I know it's so much easier said on the outside, but like even if the thing doesn't work out, you have that experience. You know, you've grown from that. And that's not something that you can buy or lose, I feel like, you know. Um and I don't know, I feel like we get a lot of those things from those I guess to call it an uncomfortable situation, you know,
Mm.
from those times of not knowing what's going to come next or basically Tony Robbins has an idea of if you want to take the island, burn the boats. You know, give yourself no way out because if you have to sink or swim, you'll find out how to swim real quick. I'm not telling somebody to go
Yep.
invest their whole life savings or anything on something that's going to fail. But I'm just saying, you know, if you put yourself in those situations,
Hmm.
um, and I'm gonna have to finish. I'm gonna have to wrap up here shortly. I didn't realize it was 12:30 already. Do
Yeah.
you have do you have a promotion that you want to promote like a website or a social media or anything
Hmm.
before we wrap up?
Yeah, just relatingacademy.com and then my Instagram and my YouTube.
Okay, and what you can send me those, but I'll just if you send them to me, I'll put them in the
Perfect.
description.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to touch on?
I think we went far and wide and deep. So we've like touched so many different topics, and I love the questions that you ask. I love how self-reflective you are, where you like take it on immediately and you're really curious about things. And yeah, this has been a blast. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, definitely, I definitely appreciate your wisdom and your insight, and I appreciate you doing this with me. Um, do you have so if you had to say in a very important lesson, maybe a really important lesson, or something that you've learned, just if it's whether it's in your personal life or your experience, your career, something that you're comfortable sharing, what do you think is a really valuable lesson that you've learned? It can be related to relationships or not related to relationships. What do you think? Something, just a little piece of wisdom for us.
The only way I got to where I got to so quickly in many different areas of life, like especially in business,
Mm-hmm.
is through people. So mm, when you value people, when you build those connections and relationships, your life is can be so magical. And I always love to say, like, you're one conversation away, right? Whatever you want something out of life. You want a partner, or you want a business, you want a new career, or there's something that you want. That's part of the human condition. And you
Mm-hmm.
never know, you're just one conversation away. And so have those conversations, be curious, and also like be generous. That's the other thing. Like be generous with people, and like, the power of mentorship. Find people who are doing what you want to do and ask them, hey, how did you do it? And maybe be useful to them. I was surprised when my success like really started to hit, like financially and like business. I was surprised that like nobody was asking me about it. Like I was like,
Mm.
hey, I'm doing all these cool things and da da da. And I had like one, maybe two, but like one or two friends who were like, how are you doing it? Like,
Right.
what's going on? Everyone else just like went into the background and sometimes hang out. And I'm like, what's going on, guys? Like, so be bold, be brave, ask the questions, be curious. Just have fun with it.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Be bold. What'd you say? Be bold. Be
Be
brave.
bold, be brave, have fun with it.
Yeah. Be curious, man. Sometimes I feel like I'm too
Yeah.
curious. Like sometimes I feel like the questions I have, like I don't know. I have a question for everything. I feel like, but I mean, if you
Mm,
don't ask, you don't know, right? I mean,
exactly. You can only ask a stupid question once. After that, it's no longer a stupid question. So,
that's a good point.
yeah.
um, and I appreciate this, man. This has been great. I will, if you want to send me the links, I'll put them in the description. I'm gonna stop the video and then I'll explain to you um, how this thing uploads and all that good stuff. But I
Hmm.
do appreciate your time here. This has been really fun.
Awesome. It has been fun. Thank you so much for having me.